Well, hello again. My name is still Reed Moore, and I know, it's like, wow, this is a lot with this guy. But no, it's Senior Sunday, so I'm excited to be up here, and we are in week 4 of our series, #Goals, where we've been looking at kind of the goals that we've got for us and maybe the goals that we should have and how do we go about pursuing those goals. And throughout the series, just to catch you up, if you haven't been here for the series or if you missed a week, week 1, we got to witness an interview between Jeff and Wendy and Andy and Sandra, and they had an interview talking about relationship goals and parenting goals. And then week 2, we got to hear from Cliff Robinson of Chick-fil-A, and he talked to us about career goals and what it looks like to handle stress in pursuit of our career goals. And then we talked about, last week we learned what it looks like to maybe open up our hands and discover what goals God has in mind for us. And we heard from Gerald here that God maybe just has more in store than we've got in mind. And so what would it look like for us to begin to discover what it is that God's got in mind for us? And now we are in week 4 of our series, #Goals. And I think this morning, what I want to do is I want to take a look at a word this morning that it's important when it comes to talking about our goals and pursuing our goals. It's a word that if you're going to set out to pursue or achieve goals in your life, especially if you're going to try to become and do all that it is that God has called you to become or do, it's a word that often shows up in our stories as we attempt to pursue our goals. The word I want us to take a look at as we're closing out our series this morning is this word right here, failure. And some of you chuckled like sort of, and then others of you were like, this is depressing, right? But like, stick with me, because the reason why I think we need to investigate this word, right, is because it's something that we're all going to bump into along the way of trying to achieve or pursue goals or become and do all that God's called us to become and do. Has anybody in here ever failed at something before? Yeah. And then the rest of you are liars, or you're lazy, or you're Jesus, in which case you should preach next week. And so, but no, we've all run into failure before. I was thinking about this. I was like, man, what's a time? Like, I mean, I have countless times that I could think of where I failed, but maybe one of my most embarrassing failures that I feel comfortable sharing from stage. One of my most embarrassing failures, I know some of you got that, yeah. Like, I've been a hot mess, right? So, but maybe one of my most embarrassing moments, it happened while I was in college. I attended the University of Georgia, and typically somebody right there, like some fan was like, "Bow, bow, bow," you know what I mean? Like, but thank you for not barking. I did it for you. But I attended the University of Georgia, and while I was at Georgia, my friends and I, we had made like this pact together to go and visit as many other college campuses as we could. We wanted to see all the other stadiums. We were gonna road trip, bro, you know what I mean? Like, whatever. And so we were gonna do that, and so we made it like our goal, and we visited a bunch of them, and there came the opportunity one weekend for us to go down to LSU, down in Baton Rouge, call in Baton Rouge, you know what I'm saying? Like, and so we had the opportunity to go down there, and we were gonna do a road trip, and we were gonna go and we were gonna watch the game, and we were also gonna go hang out with some friends of mine that I had grown up with, and so we were really excited. We're gonna do this road trip, and so I borrowed my mom's car. the Suburban. I didn't like steal it. Like I actually borrowed it. I asked her, right? Mom, can I use the Suburban, right? Because my car was called junk, right? And so I was like, it's not gonna make it. And so like, Mom, can I borrow the Suburban? And so we took the Suburban and we took off on our road trip down to Baton Rouge. And along the way, it was kind of like it's a long drive. And along the way, we had some little hiccups here and there. I got hit by a lady in the Chick-fil-A drive-thru. She went backwards instead of forwards. And I was like, what? And then she drove away, obviously not a Christian. And so I was like, what? How dare you? Like that chicken is gonna hurt. You know what I'm saying? Like, and so I was like, oh my gosh, right? And then while we were in Mississippi, a piece of hail, we went through a hailstorm and a piece of hail hit the glass on our windshield, cracked my mom's windshield. And I was like, what? No, right? Like, and then though, the mega failure happened. And that is when we finally got into Louisiana. We're close. We're probably, GPS says we're like 12 miles from the exit and we're getting there. And as we're driving, all of a sudden, I hear a and I'm like, oh, and then the front right of the car kind of feels like it's down, and I'm doing this, you know what I mean? Like the wheel, and I'm like, I don't know much about cars. Like my dad wasn't like a car guy. Like, hey, boy, let's change the carburetor. You know what I'm saying? Like whatever. Like we didn't do that. Like if that's you, do you, boo boo, right? Like so. But that wasn't me. Like I wasn't like a car guy growing up. We didn't change our own oil or anything. Like I was like, that's what we pay people for. And so like, I was like, no, like I was like, okay. So now all of a sudden though, my car is like the wheel's tugging and the car is like, and I told my friend Marcus, I was like, Marcus, like look out the window and see like, what did we hit? Because it feels like we hit a turtle and now the turtle is like hanging on, like, it's like, what is happening right now? And so we're like, oh my gosh. And then, and so as Marcus is rolling down the window, all of a sudden he's looking out the window and he's like, I think we have a flat tire. And then all of a sudden the tire goes from flat to it shreds. And it pulls us off the side of the road, across 3 lanes of traffic. And you're doing the, you know what I mean? Like, we go off the road into the dirt on the side of the road. It's kind of like drizzling, raining, and you can see the scene. Now all of a sudden we have that moment where like after you've had like a near-death experience where you both just sit there and you're like, and then there's elation. You're like, we made it, you know what I mean? Like, oh, and then like you're making promises to each other. Marcus is like, I swear I'm going back to church. I swear it. Like, you know what I mean? Like, and so it's like one of those moments where it's like, oh my gosh, like we made it, and we get out and we check the damage, and literally the whole right front tire is shredded. It's on the rim. And so now we have this predicament and we're like, okay, we need to change this tire. This is where my failure comes in, right? It wasn't the driving, right? I was a fantastic driver. And so this is where the failure comes in. We look at each other and Marcus says, you know how to change a tire, right? And I'm like, no, right? Like here we are, we're 2 21-year-old guys and we're looking at each other like, you know what I mean? Like, and now we realize neither of us know how to change a tire. And this is something we're like both looking at, like, we should both know how to do this, right? Like, parenting fail, right? Like, Dad, you're in here, right? Like, where was that at, right? And so I'm like, oh my gosh, like, we didn't know how to change this tire. And so we're like, okay, like, we can figure it out. And so we did what most guys do. We took the owner's manual, right? Like, who needs that, right? And so we went in the back and we found all the stuff, the jack and that, like, tool that, like, clips together and you do the little thing, you know what I mean? We found all the tools. We put the jack under where we thought it went. We were just like, just under, right? Like, and so I know, you guys can already see, this is gonna be awful. And so we put the jack under just somewhere in the vicinity of the bottom of the car, and we begin to crank this thing. And I am down there just cranking my little heart away, and it's going, and the thing looks like it's going up, but the car is not going up. And I'm wondering, like, why is this car not moving? And I've been down there for like it feels like forever. I don't know, maybe it was like 5 minutes, right? But I'm down there, my arms are getting tired. And I'm like, Marcus, what is going on? Why is this car not moving anywhere? And he's like, I don't know, and he's like, I don't know. And I'm like, well, you get down here and you crank this thing and I'm gonna watch. And so then he gets down and he goes to crank and he goes, oh, I see the problem. You see, we were off the side of the road and it was wet, and the jack had, it was doing its thing, but instead of pushing the car up, the jack was just sinking into the mud. So it's just like, and so now we're both like, oh, like what are we gonna do? Like how are we gonna get this thing out? How are we gonna make this car go up so that we can change the tire? So we get down there and we're like digging, you know what I mean? Like, and we're trying to dig this thing out, but it's in there. Like it's firmly implanted in the mud. And now the car is still sitting on its rim. And we're like, oh my gosh, what are we gonna do? And we're having that moment of panic, and I'm feeling the rage tears coming on, you know what I mean? Where you're like so mad you wanna cry. Like you're not sad, you're just like, I just wanted to work, you know? And I'm like frustrated at this point, right? And so I'm like, what are we gonna do? And Marcus is like, maybe we could lift it. And I'm like, what? This is a Suburban, this is not a Corolla, you know what I mean? Like, this is not your mom's Prius, right? Like I was like, this is not going anywhere, right? But we're desperate, and so we both, you know, right? Like, and right at the point where I thought my back might just, you know, like, we were like, oh my gosh, like we're not gonna be able to fix this. And so here I am, I take my man card out, light that on fire, and I realized like I completely have failed in this moment. And so I did what any other smart man did. I called a woman. And so, I know ladies are like, yeah, that's right. I don't even know what I would do, right? So, but I called my mom. Literally, I called my mom and I was like, you know, now at this point, I'm just so mad. I just want the, you know, my mom's like, it's okay, baby, you know. And my mom did what great moms do. She called AAA. AAA showed up, you know what I mean? Exactly. She called AAA. AAA shows up, right? And they changed the tire, you guys, embarrassingly fast. You know what I mean? Like you know, like where you kind of like you want them to help you, but you also want them to struggle a little bit. You know what I mean? Like I wanted the guy to at least have to go back to his car and be like, oh, I'm gonna need a different tool. But no, he came and he was like, and it was like NASCAR. I was like, what? Right? Like, it's like when you've been like trying to like open a pickle jar and then someone just goes, poof, you know, like it felt like that. It was like, oh, right? Like, and I was so embarrassed, right? It was such a mega fail on my part. Like it was just one of those moments where Marcus and I both were like, you never say anything about this. You know what I mean? And so now, Marcus, if you're watching, I just told the world, right? So, but it was a huge failure, right? And maybe you've never failed like that before. Maybe you've never been broke down on the side of the road calling your mom, asking her to send AAA. But here's what I know about every single one of us, is that in your life, like you have, or at least you will, experience this thing called failure, especially if we're going to pursue our dreams, if we're going to pursue our goals, if we're going to pursue our passions, if we're going to discover God's purpose and become all that God's called us to do and be. Like if that's going to happen, we are going to run into this thing called failure. Every single one of you have bumped into this in one form or another, and at one point or another, to varying degrees, right? Small or big, we've all experienced failure. For those of you that are in high school or middle school and you're in the room, like you've experienced it in the form of maybe you failed a test, right? And you're like, stop talking about it, right? But maybe you failed a test. Maybe it was a failed relationship. Maybe it was a failed marriage. Maybe it was a failed second marriage. Maybe it was a career fail. The business plan you had set up, it completely flopped. Maybe it was the job that you applied for that you failed to get. Maybe it was the job that you failed to keep. Maybe it was the job you got, but the failure was who you became along the way. Like we've all bumped into failure in one form or another, right? And here's what I know about failure, and this is why it's so important for us to talk about in regards to our goals. We've all bumped into it, and here's what I know about it, is that failure, it hurts, doesn't it? It stings. It's disappointing. It's discouraging. It's disillusioning. It's disheartening. It's a bunch of other words that I can't think of right now, but it's all of those things. It hurts. It hurts. And not only does failure sting, not only does it hurt when it happens, not only does it sting, but also failure has this funny way of sticking, doesn't it? Not only does it sting, but it can also stick with you. It can feel like it defines you. It can feel like all of a sudden, like it's not just something that happened, but now all of a sudden it's who you are. It breaks my heart to say this, but there are some of you in here, and your failure has become the filter through which you view yourself and your life and your potential and your purpose. There are many of you in here, and because you failed, it's not that you think that you failed, you think that you are a failure. There are some of you in here and you don't think that you just screwed up, you think that you're a screw up. There are some of you in here and you've made mistakes and you don't think that you've just made mistakes, you think you're the mistake. And your failure has stuck with you and it's sticking with you like a stain that you can't seem to get off. And you feel like it's defining your future and your potential. You feel like it's always going to be there. You've allowed your failure to label you. For some of you, this is what's even worse. For some of you, it wasn't even your failure. It was someone else's, but it affected you. And now you carry it. And because of what someone else did, you're allowing it to define you. This is what failure can do. It can feel defining. It can sting, it can stick with us. And not only that, but here's what I've learned from my own experiences is that not only does it sting and not only can it stick, but it is inevitable. Failure is inevitable. If you're going to walk through this thing called life and you're going to take risks and you're going to try anything and you're going to pursue your goals, what you need to know, especially seniors over here, you need to get this, you need to hear this. Failure is not an if, it's a win. It's not an if, it's a win. It is inevitable. You're going to run into it. The question that we've got to ask ourselves is, what do we do when we bump into failure? Along the way of pursuing our goals and our dreams and trying to become all that God's called us to be and do all that God's called us to do, along the way, we're gonna have to figure out what do we do with this word right here, failure? How do we respond when we bump into it? And that's what I wanna talk about to close out our series this morning. I wanna talk about what do we do when we bump into this thing called failure. And to do that, I want us to take a look at the life of maybe one of Christianity's most famous followers, but also one of its biggest failures. I want to take a look this morning at the life of a guy named Peter. And if you were here with us last week, you heard Gerald talk about the introduction of Peter's life and when he first started following Jesus. If you've been around church at all, you've heard the name of Peter. Probably, even if you haven't been around church, you've probably heard of Peter. But this morning, we're going to take a look at his life and what happened when he bumped into failure and what we can learn from his life. And so just to give you, though, a little update about Peter, just to catch everybody up. So in case you've never heard of Peter, Peter was a fisherman. He was a fisherman who runs into Jesus one day, experiences something incredible, the most incredible catch of fish that he's ever experienced, and he realizes there's something special about Jesus, and he begins to follow Jesus. Along the way, following Jesus, Peter becomes like the zealous one in the group, the outspoken one in the group, the one who will be the first to try whatever. He's the guy, like in your small group, if you've ever been in a small group, who's like the first one to pray, like, I'll pray and close. And you're like, ooh, and he probably used the big words like, and Lord, sanctify us by the fire. And, and you're like, whoa, not praying after him ever, right? You know what I mean? Like, so he's like that kind of a guy. He's the outspoken one, the first one to speak up, the first one to try something when Jesus says we're going to try this, right? He's the first one who steps out of the boat and walks on water, which is incredible, right? Sometimes he catches a bad rap for that. And everybody's like, yeah, well, he lost faith. I'm like, well, he walked on water longer than you did. And so Peter, right? This is Peter. If you were taking bets on who's going to stick with Jesus to the end, you would be putting your money on Peter. Of course, you're not betting because you're Christians, but like Peter, right? This is who Peter is. He's that guy, right? He's the guy who's most likely to stick with Jesus to the end. He's kind of like the A-team apostle. He's the disciple who everybody's betting on is going to ride or die with Jesus. And towards the end of Jesus' life, right, Jesus has this conversation with his friends, and this is where I want to pick up with Peter's life. Jesus begins to have this conversation with his friends where he's telling them what's about to happen and what's going to come next. And he starts to very plainly kind of lay out the end of his own life and how he's going to die and be resurrected. And he starts to talk to them about this. And at this meal that he has with his friends, Peter is there and the other 11 disciples are there and they're sitting there and Jesus starts to have the conversation. He opens it up by saying, hey, one of you is going to betray me, which everybody's like, what, right? Like, and they're looking around and most of them are going like, no, not me, not me, not me. Judas is in the corner. It's going to be me. You know what I'm saying? Like, and so that was just for May and Justin Timberlake. So, But you have this moment, right? Like where, oh my gosh, like here he is and he's laying out, somebody's gonna betray me. And he's like, and then I'm about to go somewhere. Let me show you how this conversation goes. This is, Simon Peter asked him, Lord, where are you going? Because Jesus has just told them, hey, I'm gonna go somewhere and you can't follow. And he says, where are you going? Jesus replied, where I'm going, you cannot follow now, but you will follow later. Now, Jesus is referencing his death. He's saying, hey, I'm about to go and die. Listen, newsflash, every single one of you is going to follow me there one day. You know what I'm saying? Like everybody's going to die. He says, where I'm going to go, you'll follow later. And then Peter asks, Lord, why can't I follow you now? He says, I will lay down my life for you. Peter's making this bold claim, and he's saying it in front of his friends. He's like, listen, I know you just said somebody's going to betray you. Not me. I'm not that guy. I will die with you. I am ride or die, literally. Like he's like, I will go to whatever lengths. He's like, I am with you all the way, Jesus. And here's Peter, and he's making this bold claim, and it's like he's saying, hey, everyone else at this table may fail you. Everyone else at this table may fall short, but not me. I'm the one who's willing to go all the way. And what Peter is doing right here out loud is what a lot of us do in our minds. You see, all of us know that nobody's perfect and that we're all gonna fail and fall short. We just believe that we're the exception to the rule, don't we? Like we know it in our minds, but we still, for some reason, we convince ourselves that we're the exception to the rule. Like, yeah, those other people might fail, but not me. Like, it's not gonna happen to me. It's not gonna be my marriage. It's not gonna be my kids. It's not gonna be my career. It's not gonna be my investments. It's not gonna be my retirement. It's not gonna be my future that fails. Yeah. Like I know failure is like one of those things that's out there, Reed, but it's not gonna be me. And that's kind of what Peter is doing right here. He's making this bold, maybe even foolish claim. He's going like, hey, look, everybody else at this table might fail, but Jesus, I'm willing to go all the way. I'm not gonna fail you, and I'm not gonna fall short. Now I love Jesus' response. Look at what Jesus says to him. Then Jesus answered, will you really lay down your life for me? Very truly, I tell you, before the rooster crows, you will disown me 3 times. Ouch, right? This is in front of all their friends. Jesus is like, really? Really? You're not gonna fail? Really? You know? He's like, actually, before the day is done, you're gonna do it 3 times, Peter. And at first you read that and you're like, whoa, like Jesus, why'd you have to do him like that? You know what I mean? Like in front of all of his friends, like really, you're gonna call him out? But it's actually good news that Jesus recognizes this about Peter. You see, the good news that we see in this is that Jesus knew Peter was gonna fail before he did it, and he loved him anyway. Jesus knew that Peter was gonna fail and fall short, but he believed in him anyway. Jesus knew that Peter was going to let him down not once, but 3 times. He was going to turn his back on him, but he called him, and he had a plan for him, and he had a purpose for him. Jesus knew Peter was gonna fail, but he loved him anyway. And the good news for all of us, you guys, is that Jesus knows you're gonna fail and fall short, and he loves you anyway. And he believes in you anyway, and he calls you anyway. And so in this moment, Jesus looks at Peter, and he's like, Peter, I know, you don't think you're gonna let me down, but I'm telling you it's gonna happen before the day is done. You're gonna do it. Now at this point, I think Peter's probably doing what a lot of us would do. He's probably thinking to himself, nah, you don't know me. Like, I'm not gonna do it. I just made this statement in front of everybody. I can't do it. I am not going to fail you, Jesus. I can't believe you would say that about me. I can't believe you would say that my failure is gonna be inevitable. Like, that's ridiculous, Jesus. You don't even know. In this high voice, you know what I'm saying? Like, and I gotta imagine that right now, like Peter's feeling a little indignant, like there's no way. There's no way it's gonna happen. Now, the story goes on, and as the story goes on, they end up in the garden, they're praying, and just as Jesus predicted, Judas betrays him, and they come to arrest Jesus. And as they come to arrest Jesus, Peter is still thinking, I can't fail Jesus. I'm gonna stick with him. I'm ride or die. I'm there to the end. And so Peter does something crazy. He pulls out a sword, which is like, what? You know what I mean? But Jesus did say it earlier. He's like, make sure you've got your swords. I don't know if he meant it for this. And so Peter pulls out the sword, chops this guy's ear off. Terrible aim. That's why he was a pastor. And so, obviously not a soldier. He was, and he chops this guy's ear off, to which Jesus like picks the ear up and puts it, you know what I'm saying? Like, and he heals it. That's the sound of healing. I don't know if you've ever experienced that before, but and so he heals the guy. And he's like, Peter, stop, put that away. Like this is all the way it's supposed to happen. I'm telling you. And Peter's still thinking, no way, I'm gonna fail him. But watch what happens next. It says, Simon Peter and another disciple, they were following Jesus because this disciple was known to the high priest. And he went with Jesus into the high priest's courtyard, but Peter had to wait outside the door. The other disciple, who was known to the high priest, came back and spoke to the servant girl on duty there and brought Peter in. "You aren't one of this man's disciples too, are you?" she asked Peter. And he replied, "I am not." Now right here, this is the first failure. This is the first thing that Peter just did that he had swore to Jesus. "Yeah, I'm not going to do that. Like, I'm not that guy. These other guys might do it, but not me." And now all of a sudden, Peter has bumped into failure. And it's not just one time, but it continues just as Jesus predicted it would. This is how it keeps going. A few verses later, it says, "It was cold, and the servants and the officials stood around a fire that they had made to keep warm. Peter, whoa, that was quick. I was like, Peter was up. Peter also was standing with them, warming himself. Meanwhile, Simon Peter was still standing there, warming himself. And so they asked him, 'You aren't one of his disciples too, are you?' And he denied it, saying, 'I am not.'" That's the second time. And then it says, "One of the high priest's servants, a relative of the man whose ear Peter had cut off." And so this guy would know, right? He challenged him. He said, "Didn't I see you with him in the garden? Like, you were the guy with the sword, like with his ear." It was Brian's ear, I remember. And so he says, again, Peter denied it. And at that moment, a rooster began to crow. And in another version, in another one of the Gospels, another one of the accounts of the life of Jesus, it says that at that moment that the rooster crowed, that Peter was looking into the courtyard and that Jesus kind of looked over and they made eye contact, which is like, pom, 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 how incredible of a moment, how convicting, how embarrassing. Here's Peter, and the thing that he swore would never happen, the thing that he promised himself that he would never do, the thing that he had boldly said, "Not me, it might happen to those other people, but that's not gonna happen in my life. That's not gonna happen in my relationship." He says, now all of a sudden, Peter has bumped into failure in a major way. And this isn't just any kind of failure. This is like failure on an epic scale. This is like a mega failure. This is like Jesus in his most vulnerable moment. This is Jesus in his weakest moment. This is Jesus when he needed his friends the most. And here is his closest friend, and he's turning his back on him. This is the kind of failure that sticks with you. This is the kind of failure that sticks to you. This is the kind of failure that can ruin your reputation. This is the kind of failure that can become a label. Peter, the backstabber. Peter, the turncoat. Peter, the denying disciple. Peter, the failed follower, right? This is that kind of a failure. And in this moment, when Peter's confronted with failure, when he bumps into his failure, when the thing that he promised he would never do, now he's done. When the thing that he thought wasn't possible has now happened in his own life, now Peter has one of two options. It's the same one of two options that you and I have when we bump into failure. His two options are this. They're to give up or to get up. Peter's got these two options, and he can give up or he can get up. He can give up and say, "Oh, well, I guess that wasn't for me. I guess I'm not what I thought I was. I guess I can't be what I thought I could be. I guess this isn't going to go the way that I thought that it would." He can give up or he can get up. And he can keep going and he can press on. And maybe you're familiar with where the story goes, but in this moment, right, like Peter's got those one of two options. Can you guess what he did? He gives up. Right? Maybe you were hoping that I was gonna be like, he gets up and then he goes and he becomes. No. Listen, he gives up. In this moment, when Peter is confronted with his failure, he gives up. He gives up and he goes right back to doing what he was doing before he ever met Jesus in the first place. He goes right back to the life that he had before. He goes right back to his old patterns of life. He goes right back to his old habits. He goes right back to being the person that he was before he met Jesus and thought that he could be something different. Peter gives up and he goes back. He does the thing that you and I have done, will do, or will be tempted to do in the future when you run into failure. Peter gives up and he goes back to doing the same old stuff. He goes back to being a fisherman. And this is what so many of us are going to be tempted to do when we run into failure. We're going to have one of two options. We can give up or we can get up. And what so many of us are going to be tempted to do when we run into failure is to give up and to go back to what we were doing before, to go back to the habits that we had before. When we run into failure, when we do the thing that we swore to ourselves that we wouldn't do, When we stumble and fall along the way trying to become someone better or someone different, the thing that we will be tempted to do is to give up and to go back to who we were in the first place, to go back to the things that we were doing in the first place, to go back to that thing that we said we would never do in the first place. And so this is what I love so much about the story of Peter. It's so relatable to me. Because here, like Peter, what we see is that he's not some superhero. He's not some super Christian. He is a flesh and blood human being who is tempted and tried the same way that you and I are, and he reacts in much the same way that you and I have in the past. Right here, when Peter bumps into failure, he gives up. Now, thankfully, Peter's story does not end right there with the give up. Because you see, Peter had given up on Peter, but Jesus had not given up on Peter. And that's good news. That's good news. You see, 3 days after Jesus' death, there was a resurrection. Just as he said he would, Jesus resurrected from the dead, and he began making house calls. He begins to visit his failed followers, his people who had given up their faith. He begins to make visits to reinstill their faith and to help them to get up instead of give up. And so he begins to visit these followers, and he finds Peter. And Peter's out and he's back fishing. He's back doing what he had done before. He's back living the life that he had lived before. And so Peter's out on his boat with some of his friends, some of the other former followers of Jesus. And they're out there on the boat and they're fishing. And there's this guy on the shore and he calls out to them, "Hey, are you guys fishing?" And they're like, "Yeah, duh," right? It's in the Greek. And so he's like, "Yeah, like, of course. Like, yes, that's what we're doing." And Jesus is like, "Are you catching anything?" And they're like, "No, not really." And Jesus throws out a famous line. He says, "Hey, why don't you throw your nets on the other side of the boat?" And they're like, "That was weird. Didn't we hear this 6 chapters earlier?" Right? You know what I mean? Like, and they're like, maybe something's starting to clue in. Like, well, that was kind of weird. I think I've heard somebody else say that. They throw their nets on the other side. And as they do, it says that they begin to haul in a catch that's breaking their nets. It's so big. There's so many fish. And in that moment, Peter realizes, oh my gosh, it's Jesus. He's back. This is incredible. And Peter gets so excited that he does a classic Peter move where he gets overzealous and he just jumps out of the boat and starts to swim while the other guys are like rowing. They're like, we're definitely gonna beat him, right? And so here's Peter and he's so excited and he's swimming and he gets to the shore and there's this reunion with Jesus and they have breakfast together on the beach. And then Jesus pulls Peter aside and they have a conversation. I want to show you the conversation that Jesus has with Peter because there's something in this conversation that's for every single one of us. So this is what the conversation says. When they had finished eating, Jesus said to Simon Peter, "Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these?" "Yes, Lord," he said, "you know that I love you." And Jesus said, "Feed my lambs." Again, Jesus said, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" And he answered, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." And Jesus said, "Then take care of my sheep." And the third time he said to him, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" And he said, "Lord, you know all these things. You know that I love you." And Jesus said, "Feed my sheep." And the very next verse says that Peter was like cut to the heart. He realizes that just like he had denied Jesus 3 times, Jesus has now just asked him, "Do you love me?" 3 times. And Peter's feeling convicted and he's feeling a little guilty and he's feeling like maybe Jesus is mad at him. Maybe Jesus is scolding him. Maybe Jesus is punishing him. But can I just tell you that the heart and the intent of Jesus in this verse is not to punish or to point a finger at Peter. He's giving him a pep talk. He's giving him a pep talk. I have 2 kids. I have a 5-year-old and a 3-year-old. My 5-year-old's name is Blakely. My 3-year-old's name is Miles. And right now, they're at the age where they're moving around. They're wild, right? They're mobile, hostile, agile. They're jumping on couches. They're jumping over things. They're running around the house. But as any of you who are parents will know, the learning to walk stage is really messy, isn't it? Somebody's like, "Yep, okay, yeah, exactly." It's messy. It's messy when they're learning to walk and there's a lot of falls, there's a lot of failure, there's a lot of bruised knees and bumps on the head. I can remember when my daughter was learning to walk, when she'd have her socks on and she'd be on the carpet, but then she'd try to get onto the hardwoods and then you'd gymnast Barbie, you know what I mean? And so all of a sudden she'd fall and she would bust. And do you know what I didn't do to my kids when they would fall, when they were learning to walk? You know what I didn't do? Is I didn't come along and be like, I can't believe you. Are you serious? Moore's walk, you know what I mean? Like, child of mine, right? Like, that's not what I did. I did not point a finger of a judgment or condemnation when they failed and they fell short. No, you know what I did is I got down on their level and I said, come on, get up. Keep going. You've got this. Let's go. Come on, another try, another step. Come on, get up. And I didn't point a finger of judgment. I extended a hand to help. And you guys, that's what Jesus is doing in this moment. That's what Jesus is doing for Peter in this moment. He's looking at Peter and he's not pointing the finger of condemnation. He didn't ask him 3 times to make Peter feel bad. He asked him 3 times to reinstill his confidence and to go, hey, Peter, it's okay, get up. I knew you were gonna fail in the first place. I knew you were gonna fall short. I told you about it before it happened and I believed in you anyway. Peter, get up and get back to being who I called you to be. Peter, I know you told yourself you were never gonna do that and now you just did it. Get up. And the same exact pep talk is extended to every single one of us. It's almost like when we fail and we fall short, Jesus looks at us the same way he looks at Peter and he says, hey, look, I know about the thing that happened with your business. Get up. I know about the divorce. It's okay, get up. I know about that you said you were gonna do this marriage better than the other marriage. Get up. Hey, I know about the relapse. Get up. I know you fell off the wagon. Get up. I know you were looking at something that you had no business to looking at and you said you weren't gonna do it anymore after you got married. Get up. Come on, let's keep going. You can make progress, right? Like this is what Jesus is doing for Peter. He's saying, get up, get up, get up. Peter, don't you dare give up. I knew your failure before it ever even happened, and I loved and believed in you anyway. That's why I went to the cross. You see, you guys, when it comes to Jesus, perfection is not the goal, it's progress. Perfection is not the goal, it's progress. If Jesus thought you and I could be perfect, he wouldn't have gone to the cross, and he wouldn't have had to die. But he knew that we couldn't be perfect, and so he died on the cross. And he walks over to Peter after his resurrection and he says, Peter, get up, get up, get up. Keep going, keep going, keep going. I know you failed. I know you fell short, but here's the good news. Your failure isn't final and it does not have to define you. Your failure isn't final and it does not have to define you. It doesn't have to have the final say over your life and your future and your families and your potential and your purpose. And so Jesus says to Peter and he says to us, get up. And you know how we get up? The way that we get up is to embrace the thing that Jesus extends to Peter right here. It's this thing called grace. You guys know what grace is? Grace is simple definition of grace is just simply getting something you don't deserve. It's a gift that you don't deserve, something you could never earn, but you get it anyway. It's this gift of forgiveness. It's this gift of a second chance. It's this gift of a fresh start. Even though you don't deserve it, Jesus offers it anyway. And some people will go, well, that sounds weak. That sounds like a cop-out. But listen, grace is not weakness. Grace is actually the strength to get up when you've messed up. That's what grace is. Grace is the strength to get up when you've messed up. And you guys, when we bump into failure, we'll be tempted to give up. But if we will embrace grace, grace can be the strength to get up when we've messed up. If we'll embrace grace, it'll give us the strength to get up and learn from our mistakes. If we'll embrace grace when we fail and fall short, it'll give us the strength to get up and learn from our mistakes, to actually go, hey, you know what? Like, what can I do in the future to not repeat what just happened? How can I learn from this? It'll also give us the strength, if we embrace grace, to get up and turn from it, to turn from your mistake, to put it in the rear view mirror, to not let what happened in the past stick with us in the present and affect our future. We can get up and we can turn from it. And then the last thing, we can get up and we can grow from it. If we embrace grace, the grace that Jesus gave to Peter and that he extends to every single one of us, we can get up and we can grow from it. And then failure doesn't have to be something that defines you. It can be something that refines you. And it can be fertilizer for your future growth. That's what failure can then be if we'll embrace grace, the grace that Jesus gives us when it comes to our failures. And so what do we do when we bump into failure? We do what Peter did. We embrace grace and we get up. And church, we've got to get this, because there are too many of us that are walking around in life allowing our failures to be the filter through which we view our lives and our potential and our future. And seniors in high school, you've got to get this. You've got to get this, because here's the deal. Along the way, as you're pursuing your future and your careers, you're going to bump into failure. And some of you already have, and things haven't gone the way that you thought that they would or the way that you thought that they should. And some of you have fallen back into a failure or a mistake, and I just need you to know that you can get up. The grace of Jesus is the strength to get up and keep going, and you can become the person that God's called you to be and do all that God's called you to do. Church, we've got to get this, because there are too many of us that have counted ourselves out and let failure define us. But if we'll embrace grace, it can be something that refines us and can be the fertilizer for our own future growth. That's the message of Jesus and the message of the gospel. So, what do you do when you fail and fall short? You embrace grace and you get up and you keep going and you move forward and you learn from it and you turn from it and you grow from it. And this is how we get better. This is the Christian life. It's not us getting together and pretending that we're all perfect. It is a lesson in embracing grace and getting up when we fail and we fall short. And so maybe you're in here this morning and you have a situation or a failure in your own life that you need to embrace grace. Maybe you're here this morning and someone else in your life has hurt you or they've failed and fallen short, and maybe you just need to extend grace so that they can embrace it. I don't know what the situation is for you, but I just want to encourage you, when you run into failure, it is not final and it does not have the final say over your life. Jesus does, and his invitation is grace. Grace and grace to get back up and to keep going forward. Amen, church? Let me pray for us. Jesus, we thank you so much for your grace, for your goodness. We thank you that because of your death and resurrection, our failure is not final and it does not define us. And so I pray that you would help us in whatever way possible. I pray that you would help us to embrace your grace and to apply it to our situations, to our own failures, to our own circumstances. I pray that you would help us to embrace that grace and to get back up, so that we can turn and we can learn and we can grow from our failures, and they can be something that actually refine us and move us forward in the future. Jesus, I just pray that over every single person in this room, that we would be a people that embraces and extends grace to others in their moments of failure. We love you. It's in your name we pray. And everyone said, amen, amen, amen.